Welcome to this Killick Explains Finance video. This week, how to deal with foreign currency risk as a UK investor. Now, what is the risk? Well, essentially, as a UK investor investing overseas, which is a good idea by the way, you've got two problems. One is called investment risk. That is the fact that when you invest in, say, US dollars in America, in an American investment, it could rise or fall in the local market. But on top of that, as a UK investor, you've now introduced currency risk, which you wouldn't have with a UK investment. And that's the idea that the exchange rate between sterling and the dollar could move, and that will affect your overall returns. Let's take a look at how and whether you want to do something about it. Now, imagine you've got £1,000 to invest and you decide not to invest in the UK, you invest it in the US market. So you'll need to translate it into dollars first, and let's take an exchange rate of £1 to $1.50. That gives you $1,500 to invest in the US market, and you invest it successfully, let's say. What do I mean by that? Well, the investment rises by $500. So now you've got $2,000 of US investments, the original $1,500 plus $500, and you think, right, I've had enough, let's cash it in. And you bring it back at, and this is quite important, the same exchange rate you invested. Now, that's a bit unrealistic, all right, and I'm ignoring transaction charges and bid to offer spreads, but let's say you can bring it back and the exchange rate hasn't moved. Great. That becomes £1,333 in sterling, which is a £333 profit on your original investment of £1,000. Fantastic. So far, so what? Well, here's the so what. Let's imagine this time, same scenario, you invest $1,500, rises by $500 to $2,000, but when you bring it back to the UK, the exchange rate has moved. The dollar has weakened, or see it conversely, the pound has strengthened. Suddenly, $2,000 at this new exchange rate, £1 to $2, only turns back into £1,000 in sterling, which means your overall sterling profit is zero. Wait a minute, didn't the investment rise $500? Yeah, but the exchange rate has cancelled out all of those gains. Now, it could work the other way, of course. That's the thing about foreign currencies. Imagine you've got your $2,000 investment out there, you've made the same $500, you want to bring it back to the UK, and the exchange rate happens to be £1 to $1. So this time, the dollar's strengthened or the pound's weakened, as the jargon goes. Turn $2,000 back at that rate into sterling, it becomes £2,000, and suddenly, wow, you've made a sterling profit of $1,000, all right? You've got a local currency investment profit, and you've made some money on the translation back into sterling. Great, but the problem is that's a huge range of outcomes. Everything from not making money to making £333 to doubling your money, and a chunk of that is down to foreign exchange movements. So, should you not bother to do anything about that? Well, some people would just say, sod it, stuff it, I don't care. I am exposed to foreign currency risk, but actually I don't mind. I can afford to live with that level of risk, and I'll just gamble that the foreign exchange rate might come in my favour, all right? In which case, you don't hedge, but you have to live with the uncertainty I just mentioned. So a lot of investors won't want that foreign currency risk. They'll be thinking, well, I don't want to do lots of hard work, choose the right investments overseas, get that bit right, and then have the whole lot annihilated by foreign exchange gains. So actually, I do want to do something about it. I'm not comfortable running foreign exchange risk. And luckily, there's a couple of sensible, practical things you can do relatively easily. So you'll get better visibility over cash receipts and payments, point 2 there. And it will tend to suit people that are kind of doing larger or more regular transactions overseas and just don't want to run or can't afford to run, more importantly, that level of foreign exchange rate risk. And currencies are pretty volatile. So, that risk is always out there. So what can you do? Well, one option, if you're somebody that has assets overseas and is going to keep assets overseas, and or you regularly travel overseas, maybe you work in other markets, it makes quite a bit of sense to have a foreign currency bank account in each of the markets that applies to. So you can have assets in the US, property for example, generating income in the US. You don't want to bring that back into the UK if you can afford to leave it in the US because of the exchange rate risk. Pay it into a US dollar bank account in the US and then use it to pay your dollar expenses in the US. So in other words, keep everything, if you want to call it that, offshore, keep it outside the UK. And you might run those bank accounts in a number of different countries if you've got assets in those countries and or you work there or visit regularly. Okay, that can make a lot of sense. But then there are the people saying, well, actually, that's quite expensive, that's quite a lot of hassle. I don't do enough business to justify that sort of approach. So is there an alternative? And there is. There is something called a forward contract, and it's quite useful. What you could do is say, I'm someone who wants to pay for a house costing $500,000 in 3 months' time. All right, so maybe you've decided to buy a house in the US market, perhaps as a second property if you're fortunate enough to be in that position, perhaps a retirement property, but you're not someone who's making a series of regular transactions in the US. It's kind of a one-off, and you're worried about what the exchange rate might be in 3 months' time, because the problem is if it moves, you don't know what your sterling commitment's going to be to fund that house purchase. And let's say at the moment, and they're often quoted like this, which is why I've done it, the exchange rate is £1 to $1.6666. That's just a quotation convention. What you could do is pick up the phone to a UK currency broker and say, look, I need to do a deal now, not in 3 months, now. I want to sell you £300,000 of sterling. That's how much I've got at a fixed rate of, and I've made it the same rate just for illustration, $1.6666. The advantage of that is that when 3 months goes by, you will get from your currency broker the dollars that you need to pay for the house. In other words, the uncertainty is gone. And the uncertainty would have been you take your $300,000 in 3 months' time, translate it at the exchange rate then, and it may or may not be $500,000. This way, you take out the uncertainty. And it works the other way around, by the way. So you could be someone who's selling a house in the US, one-off transaction, you don't do it very often. You're going to get $500,000 in 3 months because it takes a while for the cash to come through. And you're thinking, well, crikey, what if the exchange rate changes? I need to know what that's worth in sterling. Maybe I've got to pay that into my pension when it comes in. I can't just afford to sit and wait. So you're thinking, well, the spot rate now is $1 buys you 0.6 of a pound, if you like. So could I do a deal with a broker? I agree to sell you now $500,000 in 3 months' time at a fixed rate of that. All right, so you're not handing over the money now, but you're setting the rate now. And that means that in 3 months' time, you'll get $500,000 from your house sale. You hand that straight over to your currency broker here, and they give you the amount you're expecting and you need of £300,000 of sterling. You could have left it all to chance, but you didn't want to take the risk. Now, in practice, just mention this, there are a few things I've ignored, all right? I've ignored the fact that today's exchange rate for a foreign currency deal isn't going to be exactly the same as the one you're quoted by the broker in my examples. There is a gap between spot rates and forward rates, and I've ignored bid to offer spreads. But hopefully you can see from what I've just done that there are at least a couple of ways that a UK investor can take out some of that overseas currency risk. Any questions? To the usual place, please.